Imagine you're playing in your favorite playground. You've been coming here for years. You know every swing, slide, and monkey bar. You've made friends here. You've learned the rules of games here. This playground feels like a second home. Then one day, without warning, the playground owner walks up to you and says, "You can't play here anymore. You said something I didn't like. Pack your toys and leave right now." How would you feel? Confused, scared, angry. Where would you go? Now imagine someone from a different playground sees what happened. They walk over to you while you're still gathering your things, tears in your eyes, and say, "Hey, I saw what happened. We have a playground too. It's not as fancy yet, but we're building it together. We have swings and slides, and we need friends like you who know how to play well with others. Would you like to come with us?" This is a lot like what's happening in our world right now. Many African students who are studying in America suddenly found themselves told they couldn't stay anymore because of things they posted on social media. Trump is deporting Africans on a mass scale, and African students have been caught in the crossfire. But then, from a small country in Africa called Burkina Faso, a young captain named Ibrahim Traoré stood up and said something powerful. "Come home. We need you here. We're building something new, and your skills and dreams are welcome." What makes someone belong to a place? Is it where you were born or where you feel welcomed? What happens when the place you thought was your future suddenly pushes you away? And what courage does it take for a leader of a struggling nation to open his arms to those rejected by a wealthy superpower? Let's travel to Burkina Faso, a country you might not have heard much about. If you looked at it on a map, you'd find it nestled in West Africa, surrounded by 6 other countries but with no ocean coastline of its own. It's about the size of Colorado, with wide savannas, dry forests, and cities where about 21 million people live. The name Burkina Faso means land of incorruptible people in the local languages of Maure and Dioula. It's a beautiful name for a country that has faced many challenges: not enough rain for farmers, poverty that makes it hard for families to afford food and medicine, and fighting between different groups that has made some areas dangerous. In September 2022, something unexpected happened in Burkina Faso. A young military officer named Ibrahim Traoré took leadership of the country. At just 34 years old, Captain Traoré became one of the youngest leaders in the world. Who is this young captain? People around the world wondered. And what kind of leader will he be? Unlike many world leaders who come from wealthy families or went to expensive schools abroad, Captain Traoré grew up understanding the daily struggles of ordinary people in Burkina Faso. As a military officer, he had seen firsthand how armed groups attacked villages and schools, making life dangerous for many families. Captain Traoré often spoke about sovereignty, a big word that means a country should be able to make its own decisions without other countries telling it what to do. He wanted Burkina Faso to grow its own food, build its own schools and hospitals, and use its own natural resources to make life better for its people. But here's where our story takes an interesting turn. While Captain Traoré was thinking about how to make his country stronger and more independent, something troubling was happening across the ocean in America, a place many African students had gone to learn, grow and enjoy the so-called American dream. Last month, something surprising began happening in the United States. The government, led by President Donald Trump, who had returned to office in January, started looking very closely at what people were saying on social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. But they weren't just looking at what American citizens were saying. They were looking at what visitors to America were posting too. Tourists, workers, and especially students who had come from other countries to study at American schools and universities. The new policy said that if you weren't an American citizen and you posted anything that criticized American policies or seemed anti-Trump, you could have your permission to stay in America, your visa, taken away. But what exactly counted as anti-Trump or anti-Semitic? The rules weren't clear, and decisions about which posts were problematic were left to the judgment of government officials. This created a scary situation for international students and visitors. Suddenly, the things they said online, even if they were just expressing concern about world events or sharing their opinions, could get them kicked out of the country. Many people were shocked by these rules. They had thought of America as the land of the free, where people could speak their minds without fear. But Senator Marco Rubio explained the government's position. Yes, America has freedom of speech, but foreigners do not have the same rights as Americans. This statement confused many people. Did it mean there were two different sets of rules, one for Americans and another for visitors? Could a democratic country have different levels of freedom depending on where you were born? Some people started comparing these policies to those in countries like China, where the government closely monitors what citizens say online and assigns social credit scores based on their behaviour. In China, saying things the government doesn't like can limit your ability to travel or access services. Now, some saw similarities in America's approach to monitoring international visitors. As hundreds of African students received notices that their visas and green cards were being revoked because of social media posts, they faced difficult questions. Where would they go? What would happen to their education? What about the money their families had invested in their American studies? What about their dreams? While African students were packing their belongings and saying tearful goodbyes to their American friends, Captain Ibrahim Traore was speaking at Burkina Faso's National Culture Week. Among the audience were members of the African diaspora, people who had been born in Africa but now lived in other parts of the world, and those born of African parents living out of Africa. During this event, Captain Traore delivered a powerful message to Africans and members of the diaspora who had gathered from various countries. He spoke about his vision for development and invited them to return to Africa to contribute their skills and knowledge. How are our cities? We can develop them. Our systems of health, education, we can develop them all. Here is it that, in the diaspora, we have all the specialties, Captain Traore said, highlighting the valuable expertise that Africans living abroad possess. What Captain Traore was saying in simple terms was, look at what we could build together if Africans who learned special skills abroad came back to help their home continent. He continued with a powerful message. Today in Burkina, we are thinking about creating a polytechnic university only to train scientific engineers, and I think you will be welcome to come and teach our young brothers. Because as long as we don't train the youth so that we can, by ourselves, produce and transform here on site, we will remain slaves. The word slaves might sound harsh, but Captain Traore was talking about something called economic dependency. When one country relies too much on other countries for basic needs like food, education, or healthcare. He believed Africa had been dependent on other countries for too long, and it was time for change. Sovereignty is a whole lot of things, he explained. We are fighting for food self-sufficiency. Those who can invest in the food industry to transform our produce right here are welcome. We produce everything here. Everything grows on our soils. Then came the part of his speech that would soon reach deported students. Those who want to invest in agriculture are welcome. Those in transformation are welcome. Education. We want to transform education because the brainwashing that we are living started from school. Captain Traore's words were bold and clear. Come home to Africa. We need your skills. We need your knowledge. We need your passion. Together we can build something new. They were plundering our wealth, Captain Traore said, and today we are taking back control, and we will never again let our wealth be plundered, because we want to live, we want our children cared for, educated, grow up in peace, and live in a healthy environment. His message wasn't just for people from Burkina Faso. He was speaking to all Africans and the people of African descent, inviting them to be part of a movement to strengthen the continent. So we are open, and you will be welcome to Africa to develop your continent, to unite your continent, he had said, and pass on the message of this unity. It is very important. This was bigger than one country. It was about a vision for a more self-reliant Africa, where young people would have opportunities to learn, create and build without having to leave for Western countries. Captain Traore's message focused a lot on sovereignty and self-sufficiency. These big words carry important meanings that are at the heart of his vision for Africa. Sovereignty means having the power to govern yourself without outside interference. For countries, it means making your own decisions about how to use your resources, how to structure your government, and how to relate to other nations. Many African countries gained their independence from European colonial powers in the mid-20th century. But true sovereignty, economic, cultural and political, has been harder to achieve. Why? because even after gaining formal independence, many African nations remained economically dependent on their former colonizers and other wealthy nations. They exported raw materials like minerals, oil, and agricultural products at low prices, then imported finished goods at high prices. This pattern made it difficult to develop local industries and kept many African countries in cycles of debt and dependency. Self-sufficiency means being able to provide for your own needs without relying heavily on others. For Burkina Faso and other African nations, this includes growing enough food to feed their populations, building their own infrastructure, developing their own industries, and educating their own citizens. When Captain Traore said, "We are fighting for food self-sufficiency. Those who can invest in the food industry to transform our produce, right here, are welcome," he was pointing to one of the most basic forms of sovereignty, the ability to feed your own people. Many African countries export raw agricultural products to other parts of the world, only to import processed foods at much higher prices. Captain Traore envisions a different model where Burkina Faso grows its own food and processes it locally, creating jobs and keeping more of the value within the country. His mention of brainwashing in education reflects another aspect of sovereignty: intellectual and cultural independence. Many African educational systems were initially designed during colonial times and still often emphasize Western perspectives, histories, and ways of thinking. Creating education systems that center African knowledge, histories, and needs is an important part of true independence. Perhaps most significantly, Captain Traore recognized that one of Africa's most valuable resources, its educated people, has often been exported to other countries. When African students study abroad and then stay in those countries to work, their home nations lose the benefit of their skills and knowledge. This brain drain makes it harder for African countries to develop their own industries, healthcare systems, educational institutions, and technologies. By welcoming deported African students and inviting members of the diaspora to return voluntarily, Captain Traore was addressing this aspect of sovereignty too, reclaiming African talent for African development. But is this vision realistic? Can African countries like Burkina Faso, which face significant challenges, including poverty, conflict, and limited infrastructure, really offer meaningful opportunities to highly educated returnees? And can they compete with the salaries, facilities, and stability that many professionals find in Western countries? These are difficult questions with no simple answers. But Captain Traore's message suggests a different way of thinking about opportunity and success, one that values contribution to community and continent alongside personal advancement. The situation that led African students to be deported from the United States raises important questions about freedom of speech, what it means and how it's applied in different countries and contexts. When Senator Marco Rubio said, "Yes, there is freedom of speech, but foreigners do not have the rights as Americans," he highlighted a view that constitutional protections apply differently to citizens versus visitors. This perspective suggests that freedom of speech is a privilege of citizenship rather than a universal human right. Many people found this troubling. After all, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, states in Article 19, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. The word everyone suggests that freedom of expression isn't supposed to depend on your citizenship status. Yet in practice, countries around the world have different approaches to this right. For years, Western leaders, media and influencers criticised China's surveillance system. They told us it was too much. Cameras everywhere, facial recognition tracking your every move, a scorecard that ranked citizens based on their loyalty to the state. It sounded like science fiction. You get points for good behaviour. But what's good behaviour? Saying nice things about the government, not criticising national policy, obeying silently, clapping when you're told to clap. And if you don't play along, your score drops. Suddenly you can't buy a train ticket, you can't board a plane, you're blocked from booking a hotel, you're denied the right to travel across your own country. Yes, you could be banned from visiting your sick mother in the next city Just because you posted something critical online, you don't need to break windows. You don't need to riot. You don't need to burn a single thing. You just have to think. You just have to speak. And that's enough. One particularly challenging aspect of the US policy was its vague definition of what constituted anti-Trump or anti-Semitic content. Without clear guidelines, virtually any post expressing concern about certain policies or conflicts could potentially be flagged as problematic. This created an environment where international students and visitors felt they had to self-censor, carefully watching everything they said online for fear of losing their legal status. Many reported feeling afraid to express any political opinions at all, even about issues in their home countries that had nothing to do with the United States. The situation raises deeper questions about the relationship between technology, speech, and government power. Social media platforms have made it easier than ever for people to share their thoughts publicly. At the same time, advances in artificial intelligence and data analysis have made it easier for governments and other powerful entities to monitor, analyse, and respond to what people say online. They're basically going to use AI to scan what you talk about on social media. This kind of automated surveillance creates new challenges for freedom of expression worldwide. For the African students who found themselves deported based on their social media posts, these abstract debates about freedom and surveillance became painfully concrete realities. Many had come to America believing it represented exceptional freedom and opportunity, only to discover that their speech was being monitored and could have life-altering consequences. In this context, Captain Traoré's welcome took on additional significance. His invitation wasn't just about offering a place to continue education or careers, it was about offering a different kind of freedom, the freedom to contribute to building something meaningful in Africa without fear of sudden rejection. If this story has stirred something in you, even just a little, then don't scroll past without doing your part. Hit that like button to show you're not one of the silent ones. Subscribe to The New Tourist if you believe these truths deserve to be heard, not buried. And don't keep this to yourself. Share this video with someone who still thinks they understand Africa, because if we stay quiet, we're no better than those who stood by and watched history burn. We're no better than those African leaders, cowards who were silent while their citizens flee their homeland for the so-called American dream. Captain Traoré highlighted several specific areas where returning Africans could make important contributions: developing cities, improving health and education systems, teaching at the planned Polytechnic University, and investing in food industry and agriculture. Let's explore what each of these might look like in practice. Let's start with urban development. Africa is experiencing rapid urbanization, with cities growing faster than in many other parts of the world. Returning architects, urban planners, engineers, and environmental specialists could help design cities that are more sustainable, livable, and resilient to climate change. They could incorporate traditional African approaches to community living while implementing modern innovations in areas like renewable energy, waste management, and public transportation. For health systems, the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of strong healthcare systems, and many African countries are working to improve medical care for their populations. Returning doctors, nurses, public health specialists, medical researchers, and healthcare administrators could strengthen these efforts. They might introduce new treatment approaches, develop locally relevant research, train new generations of healthcare workers, or help create more effective health policies. While in education transformation, Captain Traoré specifically mentioned creating a Polytechnic University, only to train scientific engineers, and emphasised the need to transform education systems that have perpetuated colonial mindsets. Returning educators could help develop curricula that centre African knowledge and priorities while preparing students for global engagement. They could introduce innovative teaching methods, create new educational technologies adapted for African contexts, and mentor the next generation of teachers and researchers, and most importantly, agriculture and food processing. Burkina Faso, like many African countries, has rich agricultural potential. We produce everything here. Everything grows on our soils, Captain Traore noted. Returning agricultural scientists, food technologists, business specialists, and environmental experts could help develop more productive and sustainable farming practices. They could establish processing facilities to transform raw agricultural products into higher value foods, create more efficient supply chains to reduce waste, and develop strategies to adapt to changing climate conditions. Beyond these specific sectors, returning Africans bring broader benefits. They often have access to international networks that can facilitate knowledge exchange, partnerships, and investment. They bring diverse perspectives that can spark innovation. And perhaps most importantly, they serve as visible examples that success doesn't have to mean leaving Africa permanently. It can mean contributing to the continent's development. However, the potential of returning talent can only be realised if there are supportive conditions. Returnees need opportunities to apply their skills meaningfully. They need basic infrastructure and resources to work effectively. They need political stability and good governance. And they need societies that value their contributions rather than viewing them with suspicion or resentment. Creating these conditions is no small challenge, especially for countries like Burkina Faso that face significant economic and security issues. But the alternative, continuing to lose educated citizens to other countries, carries its own steep costs for African development. By explicitly welcoming deported students and inviting diaspora members to return, Captain Traore was acknowledging both the challenge and the opportunity. He was saying, in effect, "We need you here. Your knowledge and skills are valuable to us. Together we can build something better than what exists now." This message resonates not just with those facing deportation, but with many Africans abroad who feel torn between opportunities elsewhere and a desire to contribute to their home continent. Could this moment, painful as it is for those deported, become a catalyst for a broader rethinking of Africa's relationship with its global diaspora? While Captain Traore's welcome to deported African students represents an inspiring vision, both the returnees and the countries receiving them face significant challenges in making this vision a reality. For individuals returning to Africa after studying or working abroad, especially those who didn't choose to return but were forced by deportation, the adjustment can be difficult in several ways: incomplete education, economic and cultural adjustments, professional infrastructure, limited resources, political instability, security concerns, and psychological impact. Despite these challenges, there are promising models for successfully integrating returnees. Countries like Rwanda and Ghana have created specific programs to attract their diaspora back, offering incentives like expedited business registration, tax breaks for returning entrepreneurs, and dual citizenship options. Professional networks can also play a crucial role. Organisations like the African Diaspora Network, the African Foundation for Development, and various country-specific professional associations provide platforms for knowledge exchange, mentorship, and collaboration between returnees and those who remained on the continent. Perhaps most importantly, success depends on reframing the narrative around return. Rather than seeing deportation as a personal and national failure, Captain Traore's approach presents it as an opportunity, a chance to redirect African talent toward African development priorities. This perspective shift doesn't erase the injustice of policies that target people based on their social media expression. It doesn't minimise the trauma of having educational and career paths suddenly disrupted. But it does offer a constructive way forward, focusing on what can be built rather than what has been lost. To fully understand the significance of Captain Traore's welcome to deported African students, we need to look at the historical pattern of brain drain that has affected the continent for generations. For Africa, this phenomenon has deep historical roots and serious ongoing consequences. During the colonial period, roughly the late 19th century through the mid-20th century, European powers established limited educational systems in their African colonies, primarily to train people for administrative positions that supported colonial governance. Very few Africans had access to higher education, and those who did often studied abroad in the colonizing country. Britain, France, Belgium, Portugal, or others. After independence, many African countries worked to expand educational opportunities for their citizens. They built universities, sent students abroad on scholarships, and invested in developing local expertise. The goal was to create a generation of educated professionals who could lead development in key sectors like healthcare, education, engineering, agriculture, and governance. However, several factors combined to turn this educational investment into brain drain. During the economic crises in the 1970s and 1980s, many African countries faced severe economic challenges due to falling commodity prices, mounting debt, and structural adjustment programs imposed by international financial institutions. This led to declining living standards and fewer professional opportunities. Political instability, military coups, civil conflicts, and authoritarian governance in various countries created unsafe or unpredictable conditions that prompted many educated people to seek more stable environments. Professional limitations as a result of inadequate facilities, limited research funding, bureaucratic obstacles, and sometimes corruption made it difficult for professionals to practice their fields effectively, particularly in specialised areas requiring advanced technology or resources. Then there's global demand of talent. Wealthy countries actively recruited skilled workers from Africa, particularly in fields like healthcare, where shortages existed. For example, some estimates suggest there are more Ethiopian doctors practicing in Chicago than in all of Ethiopia. The statistics illustrate the scale of this exodus. Approximately 70,000 skilled professionals leave Africa annually. Some countries have lost more than half of their college-educated citizens to emigration. The financial impact is enormous. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa has estimated that brain drain costs the continent about $4 billion annually in lost human capital. The healthcare sector provides particularly stark examples. Malawi has lost more than half of its nursing staff to emigration, primarily to the UK. Zimbabwe at one point had only 360 physicians serving a population of 13 million, having lost thousands of healthcare workers to other countries. In Ghana, more than 60% of doctors trained in the 1980s had left the country by the 1990s. This context helps explain why Captain Traore's welcome to deported African students represents more than just a humanitarian gesture. It signals a potential reversal of a long-standing pattern that has hampered African development. Rather than continuing to lose talented individuals to countries like the United States, whether willingly through career choices or unwillingly through deportation, his message envisions redirecting that talent toward African priorities. The approach recognizes that while individual Africans may benefit from opportunities abroad, the continent as a whole suffers when its educated citizens don't return. It suggests that true development requires not just financial resources or foreign expertise, but the contributions of Africa's own people, especially those with education, skills, and exposure to different approaches and technologies. By framing deportation not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity for returnees to contribute meaningfully to African development, Captain Traore is challenging both the deported students and other African countries to reimagine the relationship between African talent and African development. As we connect the various threads of this story, a powerful narrative emerges, one that transforms what begins as injustice and disruption into opportunity and renewed purpose. When Captain Traore says, "We will never again let our wealth be plundered," he includes human capital among that wealth. The skills, knowledge, and creativity of African people represent a precious resource that has too often benefited other nations rather than the continent itself. This perspective transforms the narrative for deported students. Instead of seeing themselves as rejected and displaced, they can recognize their value as contributors to a new vision of African development. Their foreign education becomes not a path to permanent emigration, but a source of knowledge and skills needed for Africa's transformation. For African countries, the return of educated citizens presents both challenges and opportunities. Integrating returnees effectively requires resources, systems, and opportunities that match their skills and aspirations. But the potential benefits are enormous: strengthened capacity in critical sectors like healthcare, education, agriculture, and technology, new perspectives that can spark innovation, international connections that can facilitate partnerships and investment, and visible examples that success doesn't require permanent emigration. As deportations continue and more African students find themselves forced to return home before completing their studies or beginning planned careers, the responses of African leaders and societies will shape whether this disruption becomes a tragedy or a turning point. Captain Traoré's welcome offers one model: embracing returnees as valuable contributors rather than failed emigrants. If implemented effectively, with supportive policies and meaningful opportunities, this approach could help transform what begins as rejection into redirection toward a more self-reliant, African-centred development path. What makes Captain Traoré's welcome particularly significant is that it's not just about providing refuge or humanitarian assistance. It's about recognising the value of African human capital and redirecting it toward African priorities. When he says we need to change the educational system and invites diaspora members to come and teach our young brothers, he's envisioning returnees not just as people who need help, but as contributors to systemic transformation. This framing has the potential to change how returnees see themselves and how African societies receive them. Rather than being viewed as failed emigrants who couldn't make it abroad, they become valued resources bringing needed skills and perspectives. Rather than focusing on what they've lost through deportation, they can focus on what they can build through their return. The journey from deportation to development won't be easy or straightforward. It will require commitment, resources, creativity, and persistence from both returnees and the societies welcoming them. But in Captain Traoré's vision, we see the possibility of turning an apparent setback into an opportunity, redirecting African talent toward building the Africa its people deserve. Let me ask you this: why are we still begging to be accepted? Why are we still surprised when we're told we don't belong? Maybe it's time we stop trying to fit in and start building places we don't need to escape from. Maybe that's the future. This isn't just a story about Traoré or Trump. It's about all of us, about remembering who we are, protecting African unity and solidarity, and rebuilding what was broken during the scramble for Africa. And if you felt anything watching this, pride, curiosity, maybe even a little fire in your chest, then don't let that feeling disappear. Subscribe to The New Tourist right now, because this isn't the last story like this we're telling. Not by a long shot. Like this video so the algorithms don't bury a story the world needs to hear. Share it with your family, your friends, and your group chats. Be the reason someone else learns the truth. And if you want to go even deeper, if you want behind-the-scenes stories, early access, exclusive discussions, join our membership community. Because this isn't just a channel anymore, it's a movement. And the story we're writing together, it's only just beginning.